Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Safer Sim webinar series. Today we have Dr. Elizabeth O'Neill presenting on, presenting how do children respond to autonomous vehicle external human-machine interface cues. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all today about our project that was actually just published in Accident Analysis and Prevention, looking at differences in how children and adults respond to eHMI timing and vehicle kinematics when making road crossing decisions. So as pedestrians, we often rely on both explicit and implicit cues and communication from drivers to better understand their intent. So we've all done this. When you've been in your town, you are at the side of the road, you see a car approaching, you want to make sure if those explicit cues are coming from the driver, right? You can see their eyes, they can see you lock gaze and you know that they're going to stop for you, or maybe they give you a little wave or they flash their headlights at you to let you know that they intend to stop for you. We also use implicit cues when trying to make these decisions. So thinking of like vehicle slowing as well as stopping and stopping distance. But pedestrians and bicyclists have expressed some concern about the lack of explicit communication cues that might be lacking when interacting with driverless and autonomous vehicles. And this is particularly problematic when pedestrians have to decide if an autonomous vehicle is going to yield to them when crossing a road. And so external human-machine interfaces are being developed and placed on autonomous vehicles to provide a means of that explicit communication. And prior work has examined a multitude of, well, a multitude is probably a strong word, but various different eHMI systems that use different communication styles to indicate whether or not they intend to yield to the pedestrian. These have included pulsing lights that maybe vary their rate to indicate when they plan to stop, common pedestrian signals such as the walk or don't walk signal that you can see demonstrated in some of the pictures on this slide here. They've also done things like put humanoid type eyes on the vehicle, as well as smiley faces, which I think you can see in this example right here. So varying effects as to how well people understand these systems, how intuitive they are. But there are studies out there that are examining various systems and how well people understand them. So how do pedestrians respond to these cues about driver intent? Well, prior studies have mostly examined how adults respond to these systems and have found that adult pedestrians can successfully be trained to interpret eHMI signals of various types, particularly in simplistic road crossing scenarios. They've also found that eHMI communication is associated with a delay into entry into the roadway, and that the earlier the eHMI signaling comes on, the more trust that participants indicated they had in the system. Studies that have also examined vehicle kinematics have found that pedestrians show a preference for gradual deceleration in combination with eHMI communication. Far fewer studies have examined children's responses to eHMI. In the paper that we just put out, we were able to reference 2 studies. I did a quick look today, and it looks like there are at least 2 more, which now brings the grand total to 5 papers that have examined this, although it is a pretty new area of inquiry. But what these studies have found is that familiar traffic information is most easily interpreted by children. And then one study that examined children's willingness to cross in front of multiple different types of eHMIs, they varied the size of the gaps that were available for crossing, as well as the speed at which the gap pair approached the crossing point. And they found that children looked to traffic less often after the eHMI turned on. They also found that children ran across narrow gaps of traffic traveling at high speeds, which is very concerning. They also took longer to cross larger gaps, which when you have additional time to do that, you can, although that doesn't leave you as much time at the end of the crossing. And then they also found that children indicated that the autonomous vehicle they thought that it would always stop for them, which we know that that can't always be true, particularly in complex traffic environments. So, but at this point, no studies had examined children's response to various eHMI timings, as well as deceleration kinematics and how those two might interact to affect children's willingness to cross, adults as well. So, for children, integrating explicit and implicit cues when making crossing judgments might be particularly difficult, because children are still developing the ability to integrate multiple cues up until early adolescence. So when making, and in addition, when making perceptual judgments, as is the case when you're crossing roads with traffic, children also struggle when these cues are inconsistent with one another. So for our study, we wanted to know several things. So first, we wanted to know, does the timing of the eHMI interface when pedestrians are willing, does the timing of the eHMI influence when pedestrians are willing to enter the roadway? How do vehicle kinematics influence willingness to cross when an eHMI is present? How might vehicle kinematics and eHMI timing interact to influence pedestrians' trust in the eHMI? And was this different for adults than it was for children? To answer these questions, we used our large screen virtual environment. So the simulator, which you can see here, consists of 3 large screens placed at right angles to one another, that forms a 3-walled room. So the front screen is 10 feet wide and the side screens are a little over 14 feet long. And what that does is that gives us enough space for our participants to cross a single lane of virtual traffic. So as you can see, well, you cannot really see, but up here, the simulator is lined with some motion tracking cameras, and they are looking for the reflective spheres that are on this very fashionable helmet that we have here at the back of the simulator. All of our participants wear that helmet. And what this allows us to do is to triangulate the position of the participant within the virtual space. And so this does 2 things for us. First, it ensures that we're able to render the virtual environment at the correct eye point for every participant that is in the study. So small children all the way up to very large and tall Iowa adults. And then it also allows us to take very precise measurements of where our participants are within the environment and in relation to other objects of interest in the virtual environment. And here that's really going to include traffic, cars. We're able to take those measurements anywhere from 30 to 60 frames per second. So we have a very precise idea of where people are in relation to traffic. In addition to wearing the helmet, our participants also wear a pair of stereo shutter glasses that alternate between the right and the left eye, and the right and left images that are projected on the screen, creating depth and a very immersive stereo virtual environment. So it seems as if cars appear within the volume of the cave here. Oh, I forgot to talk about how we render images. So we have we have projectors behind all of the side screens and the front screen that rear project images onto these screens. And we also have a 4th projector, and you can just see the mirror for it here that sits about right here, and then projects images onto the mirror, which are then thrown onto the floor. So this is what it looks like when we have our images rendered and everything in the virtual environment is fired up and ready to go. Another piece of equipment that we use is tethered here to this post. the back of the virtual environment, you can just kind of see the rope. Maybe you can see it here. We have a harness that our participants wear, and we have them wear that so that they don't run through our front screen if they decide to book it through a gap. So for this particular study, we used a mixed design with a between subjects variable of condition. We had 3 conditions that included an early eHMI timing, a late eHMI timing, and then a control group in which there was no eHMI that communicated information to our participants. And then we also had a within subjects variable of deceleration profile. So our traffic could either decelerate gradually or abruptly. 2 age groups were separately tested and analyzed, and that was a group of adults that you can see here. We have roughly equal numbers in each condition, and then children aged 8 to 12. And we also have roughly equal numbers of kiddos in that study as well. So in terms of the procedure, so a gap pair traveling at 25 miles per hour approached the crossing point. The tail car in the gap was an autonomous vehicle. Participants were told that the first car in the gap would never stop for them, but that the second car sometimes would. Those that were in the early and the late eHMI condition were also told that the second car was driverless, but that it had a light on top that it used to communicate with people. Importantly, we never told our participants how the eHMI would communicate with them. So we started with 2 warm-up trials. In the first warm-up trial, the second car did not stop. And then for the first warm-up trial, the second car did not stop. And then for the second warm-up trial, the second car either stopped gradually or abruptly. And for the early and the late eHMI conditions, the dome light that you see on top changed from red to green according to their condition, so either early or late. Following warm-up, we had 36 testing trials. 24 of those trials were yielding trials in which the second car did yield to allow the pedestrian to cross, and 12 in which the second car did not yield. Those served as foils so that our participants didn't learn that cars would always stop for them. Importantly, those trials were in a randomized order. Additionally, for half of the yielding trials were gradual deceleration, half were abrupt deceleration. Those were also randomized within the testing trial session. At the conclusion of the VR task, participants were interviewed about their experience. So in terms of the deceleration profile, we kind of have that outlined for you here. For our gradual deceleration, you can see that deceleration starts at a little more than 7 seconds. So 7.26 seconds from the point at which the vehicle will stop or at the crossing point. And for abrupt deceleration, it begins 3.63 seconds before reaching the crossing point and stopping. For our control condition, the dome light that was atop the vehicle was gray and stayed gray throughout the experiment, so it never communicated its intent. For our early eHMI onset, the dome light turned from red to green at the start of deceleration. So that was 7.26 seconds for trials in which deceleration was gradual and 3.63 seconds for trials in which deceleration was abrupt. For those in the late eHMI onset condition, the dome light here turned from red to green when the car came to a complete stop at the crossing point. So we assessed trust by examining timing of entry into the roadway relative to the time that the autonomous vehicle stopped at the crossing line. So here, negative values are going to indicate that our participants entered the roadway prior to the car coming to a complete stop, whereas positive values indicate that they entered the roadway after the vehicle came to a complete stop. So adults in the late eHMI condition did not differ from those in the control condition or the late condition for either gradual or abrupt deceleration, although we do see a different pattern of behavior between the two different deceleration types, as indicated by our condition by deceleration interaction that was significant. So when deceleration was gradual, those in the early condition entered the road well before the car came to a complete stop, whereas those in the control and the late condition pretty much waited to enter the roadway until after or just before the autonomous vehicle came to a complete stop. Conversely, when deceleration was abrupt, all of our participants waited until the autonomous vehicle came to a complete stop before entering the roadway, yet those in the early condition did so sooner than those in the control and the late condition. Kids, on the other hand, exhibited a different pattern of behavior than adults, with those in the late eHMI condition differing significantly from those in the early and the control conditions. And this again varied by deceleration type. So we had another significant condition by deceleration interaction. Notably, even in gradual and abrupt deceleration, entry into the roadway in the control and the early conditions did not significantly differ from one another. So when cars decelerated gradually, children in the late eHMI onset condition waited for that autonomous vehicle to come to a complete stop before entering the roadway, whereas those in the early and in the control conditions entered before the car came to a complete stop. When cars decelerated abruptly, children in all three conditions, like adults, waited for the car to come to a complete stop before entering the roadway. However, those in the late condition waited significantly longer to enter the roadway than did kiddos in the control and the early condition. So when interviewed about their experience, adults indicated that they noticed the varying deceleration types and they were able to describe those. However, this was less prevalent among those in the control condition and was more prevalent among those in the eHMI conditions. Adults also reported using vehicle deceleration as the primary cue to help guide their crossing decisions across all conditions. Adults also indicated that they both noticed and understood that the dome light change from red to green, that they understood that and knew what it meant. Children, on the other hand, noticed something about cars slowing down, but they really were not able to articulate what those differences were. Children also reported that they used deceleration as the primary cue to guide their crossing decisions. However, this wasn't as prevalent as it was among the adults. Importantly, children did both notice and understand what the light change meant for both the early and late eHMI onset conditions. So it seems that adults rely primarily on vehicle kinematics in the control and the late conditions, which makes sense, right? Because eHMI information is either not present or it comes on so late that it might as well not be present. Adults use the eHMI information when it's available early and it matches car deceleration. Children, however, seem to rely more heavily on vehicle kinematics than adults do when there is no light, leading them to enter the roadway early when cars decelerated gradually in the control condition, when there was no indication that the car would actually stop for them. Additionally, they entered the road early when the early eHMI onset came on, also indicating additional trust. So I think that this work is really significant for a number of ways. So as eHMI systems become more prevalent, as driverless cars become more prominent on roadways, it's going to be really important for vehicle manufacturers to take sort of the special needs of children and other vulnerable road users into account, right? We need to make sure that we're accounting for their less developed road crossing skills and decision-making skills when developing and implementing these systems. Otherwise, we could find our children making very risky decisions when crossing roads. We feel that in order to reduce injury risk, autonomous vehicles that are equipped with the eHMI should communicate their intent at the time of stopping to ensure that children do not enter the roadway before vehicles come to a complete stop. And if you take this work in conjunction with earlier work showing that children don't look to traffic as much after eHMI onset, we think that this is really critical because it's important that even though an eHMI, an autonomous vehicle may communicate their intent to you, there are likely going to be other vehicles on the roadway, particularly in complex road crossing situations. And so we need to make sure that we're creating a system in which people are situationally aware of everything that's going on. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions that you guys may have for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any participant is welcome to unmute themselves and ask a question if they have one. Or if you prefer not to do that, you can type it in the chat and I'll read it up. I don't hear anyone and I don't see anybody typing. So, oh, there's a thank you, a thumbs up from Jeff.
Thanks,
Thank you
Jeff.
very much. And with that, I think we'll close. Elizabeth or Dr. O'Neill's contact information is on the screen. So if you think of a question later, please feel free to contact her.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Dawn.